everyone, and welcome back to Classic Comics. Over this Labor Day weekend, I saw the director's cut of Star Trek II and thought I'd give a few thoughts on it. This won't be a proper review, however. I've seen the film many times, of course. I saw it when it was in theaters back in '82, and I've been a fan of it ever since. Like many, I consider it probably the best Star Trek film. Now, this was described as the director's cut, the director being Nicholas Meyer. However, after watching it, it seems to basically just be the broadcast version that was shown on network television back in the day. Back then, and I'm talking about the 70s and 80s, movies that were shown on network broadcasts often didn't fit the time slot during which they were shown and would have to have deleted footage added in to help fill the time slots properly. One of the best examples of this is the first Star Trek film, Star Trek the Motion Picture. Superman, the movie, they did it with that one as well. And that's pretty much what this version was. There isn't much that wasn't in the theatrical version. The main footage that was added back in was a scene where Scotty's nephew dies. Scotty becomes distraught and then he leaves. Now, in this version, Kirk and the nephew have a few lines between them, and then Scotty has more lines after the boy dies. There's also a scene on Regular One that has some lines added back into it. Other than that, it's pretty much the same film we know. Now, one thing I wanted to mention is how great the soundtrack is for this movie. It's always been one of my favorites. But after seeing it again on the big screen, I have to mention just how great James Horner's score for this film is. His music does such a great job of underscoring the dramatic tension during Khan's initial attack, when Khan gives the brain slugs to Chekhov, or emphasizing the action when the Reliant and the Enterprise are attacking one another. If I have an issue with the film, it would probably be Khan's fellow superhumans. Now, in the original episode, it is mentioned that Khan is a Sikh from India. But aside from Khan himself, in this movie, the others are all played by blonde-haired Aryan types, which doesn't really make any sense. And in addition, their ages are off as well. They all seem to be around 30 or so, which makes them too young to have been part of Khan's original crew, and yet also too old for them to be the offspring of the crew. The effects still hold up, the plot is solid, it still has some of the best dialogue in the history of Star Trek. The screenplay is credited to Harve Bennett and Jack Sowards, but director Nicholas Meyer actually took their screenplay and polished it up in order to make it workable, and he never really got credit on that. It's worth noting that after the first movie was a disappointment, Gene Roddenberry was moved to a consultant position, as the studio placed a lot of the blame for the first film's problems on him. Now, he definitely did share some of the blame, and it didn't help that he and the studio had a pretty contentious relationship. Harve Bennett was then brought in to produce Star Trek II and make sure that the budget didn't get out of control the way it did on the first film. Bennett actually came from a TV background. He was actually the producer of The $6 Million Man, and he had a rep as a guy that ran a tight ship and got things done on time and under budget, which is exactly what Paramount wanted. Meyer came from a literary background, being a fan of Sherlock Holmes and even writing a Holmes novel, The 7% Solution, which is about Holmes confronting and overcoming his cocaine addiction with assistance from Sigmund Freud, believe it or not. The book was turned into a film that Meyer wrote and directed, establishing himself in Hollywood. He then followed that with the film Time After Time, a personal favorite of mine about H.G. Wells traveling from Victorian England to America in the late 70s in pursuit of Jack the Ripper. Now, his work led to him being recommended for Star Trek. Meyer had no real experience with Star Trek. He wasn't even a casual fan. He had never seen Star Trek before accepting the assignment, but he watched several original episodes to get a feel for what it was all about. His approach to Star Trek also involved making Starfleet more obviously a military organization. The new uniforms at the time looked more like actual military uniforms than the original series versions did, and they were a big improvement on those bland gray onesies that Roddenberry wanted everyone to wear in the first movie. Roddenberry didn't like the new uniforms. In fact, he didn't really like much of anything that Bennett and Meyer were doing. In his role as a consultant, Roddenberry was allowed to give his opinions on any changes Meyer and Bennett made, and also on the screenplay, but Meyer was under no obligation to follow any of Roddenberry's advice. Roddenberry made it clear that he hated everything they were doing. Roddenberry remained adamant that Starfleet wasn't the military, even though that flies in the face of all evidence to the contrary, and he didn't like the darker, more cramped look of the bridge and the ship, and above all, he didn't like that Spock was being killed off. A lot has been made in recent years about Star Trek being in line with Roddenberry's vision of the future, and while I absolutely agree that he would have hated what's been produced under the Star Trek name in recent years, it's worth noting that his vision of Star Trek was far more restrictive than even most fans. He pretty much hated any Star Trek that he didn't have a direct hand in creating. He didn't like Star Trek being overtly militaristic. He didn't like Star Trek being funny or silly in any way. He didn't like The Trouble with Tribbles, for example. And he didn't approve of any of the movies except for the first one, which he, of course, had a hand in making. This remained the case right up to the end. He died during the filming of Star Trek VI, also directed by Nicholas Meyer, by the way, and Roddenberry was once again in a consultant position, and he and Meyer had numerous arguments during the making of the film. The final one came just a week or two before Roddenberry's death. They said some pretty harsh things to each other during those arguments, and Meyer later expressed regret about his and Roddenberry's relationship ending on that note. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the film. If you haven't seen it before, Fathom Events will be showing it again Thursday night at 7 p.m. in select theaters if you're interested. Let me know your thoughts on Star Trek 2 in the comments, and before you go, please like this video, please sub to the channel, and hit the bell for notifications, and I will see you all next time. Thanks for watching.